Kathy Spires thought she had found the love of her life.
Steve became Prince Charming to me. I felt really special. I felt that I mattered.
Steve was definitely mysterious.
But soon, Kathy would learn that her husband was far more mysterious than she bargained for.
He said he had worked for the CIA, scary stuff.
Steve made up so many stories about where he'd been, what he'd done, what he was running from.
Who did Kathy Spires really marry?
How could this quiet, meek knight be this mercenary killer?
When it comes to love and marriage, things aren't always what they seem. When your past is something that you would rather forget, sometimes a fresh start is all you need. Kathy Spires knows this firsthand.
I grew up in Southern California where I drank and partied, and drinking got really out of control for me in my life.
As a single mother to a 9-year-old, Kathy knew she had to make a change. By the time she turned 30, she had finally beaten her addiction to alcohol.
I wanted to go to a new place where I could build new memories with my daughter. We would, fresh start.
In the summer of 1980, Kathy and her daughter moved from Southern California to Denver, Colorado, to start a new life.
I wanted to open up a beauty salon, and it took me some time to do that. So I was working part-time as a waitress.
And at that waitress job, Kathy met a mysterious busboy named Steve Markham.
He followed me around like nobody's business. I didn't really think too much of him.
Steve was not a rock star by no means, but she was becoming more and more attracted to a guy that she was not really physically all that attracted to.
He sent me a dozen roses at work, long stem roses. And although I wasn't attracted to him, I really began to like his heart and his spirit.
Soon, Steve and Kathy began to date. And as their romance took off, Steve continued to up the ante.
One day, I was taking a bubble bath. My daughter came in and she said, "Mom, you gotta come out here." So I followed her out to the driveway. And in the driveway was a copper-colored Porsche. And I go, "What is that?" She handed me the keys and she goes, "Mom, Steve gave you that car."
Kathy immediately began to wonder how a busboy could afford such extravagance. As the couple grew closer, Steve began to open up about his past.
He had no brothers or sisters, and he was raised by elderly parents.
Steve told Kathy that both his parents had passed away, leaving all their assets to him.
His father was an artist and made chess pieces, and many of them were made out of gold. And he had them turned into gold bars because he was going to sell them.
The place where Steve stored his gold was very unusual, to say the least.
Steve put the gold bars in his toilet tank. That was pretty weird. And when I asked him, "Why don't you go take it to the bank?" he didn't trust the banks.
All of the intrigue made Kathy fall even harder for Steve. But her good friend Nancy Valentino wasn't as easily impressed.
These stories were so bizarre. My thought was, Kathy has flipped out.
Kathy had flipped for Steve. And in the summer of 1981, less than a year after they met, Steve and Kathy were married.
It was really a fun day. It was in a Golden, Colorado, in a hunting lodge. Beautiful surrounding nature. Couldn't have been more beautiful in every way.
Back home in Denver, the couple settled into their new life together. But just a few months later, Steve made a shocking confession about his past.
He said he had worked for the CIA, and apparently he had killed this guy in a bar, defending his girlfriend's honor. The person he killed was a civilian, which was something that you don't do.
Fearing retribution, Steve claimed he had left the agency without its blessing and was now on the run from a former CIA operative.
He told me that he was planning on blackmailing the government and that he wrote an expose who he was supposed to assassinate by orders of our government. Scary stuff.
Kathy was stunned. But a woman's heart is a funny thing.
I think I was really beginning to start getting afraid, but I loved him.
Kathy chose to forgive Steve for keeping his past as a CIA hitman a secret. And over the next 3 years, life for the couple was smooth sailing. But one spring day in 1984, when Kathy returned home from a trip, things began to get extremely strange.
When I came back from my trip, instead of my Porsche being in the driveway where it always was, no Porsche. Where is it? What happened?
Steve claimed that the CIA had caught up with him at last and had frozen his assets. They had impounded Kathy's car. Kathy had heard enough.
I said, you go figure it out. Don't come back until you can prove to me that we're safe. I'm going to ask you questions and I want answers.
But Kathy had no idea that her quest for answers would uncover a far darker side to her husband. Darker than she could ever imagine.
Steve was like an onion, and the more the layers I took off, the more rotten it became.
Three years into her marriage, Kathy Spires had no idea who her husband really was. Steve claimed he was a former CIA hitman and that the agency wanted him back.
He said they're going to recruit me to join the Black Op again. They may try to blackmail me and say, if you don't do it, we're going to kill her. We're going to kill your family.
Terrified for the safety of herself and her young daughter, Kathy asked Steve to leave their home and not return until he severed his CIA ties for good. Steve went to Florida, where he said he would speak with his former boss. A few weeks later, he contacted Kathy.
Steve gives me a call from Florida and says that he's pretty sure it's cleared up. But when he comes back, he didn't give me proof. And I said, what do you have? And he couldn't really answer me.
Steve's dubious response didn't sit well with Kathy. She pressed him for more information.
Steve told me, my real name is Eric Stone, and I'm not lying about that, and that's the truth. And I was building up the point that I cussed probably for an hour. Man, I can still feel it raging. And I said, I need to find out who you are. I need to know where you're from.
So Steve, now Eric, volunteered to take Kathy to his hometown of Exeter, California.
I said, if I catch you in any more lies, I'm going to drop you off on the freeway, and you will not be with me.
Once in Exeter, Eric led Kathy to his childhood home.
So we end up in front of this field of dirt and weeds. It's vacant and there's no house. And it was explained, that there was a fire, that everything he had burned up in that fire.
The next stop was the local cemetery, where Eric said his parents were buried.
So I get out of the car, start looking on the ground for headstones. And I'm looking for a last name, Stone, because his real name was Stone.
But his parents' graves had mysteriously vanished. Distraught, Eric claimed the CIA must have moved them.
He's on the ground and he's pulling at the grass. He begins to sob, screaming. Tears are coming out of his eyes. He's wailing.
After such a display of anguish, Kathy believed her husband must be telling the truth. Still, she needed more reassurance, so Kathy made Eric take her to a place where she was sure to dig up his past. His old high school.
So he asked for the yearbook, and the first thing I see is a message from Eric, president of the class. I went, wow. But I go down and read it. It's Eric Wright. W-R-I-G-H-T.
It was yet another lie. Eric's last name wasn't really Stone either. It was Wright.
And he flips over to another page. And I see Eric Wright, most dependable. Another one, Eric on the debate team. And I don't know what to do or what to think. He just lied to me again.
And true to form, Eric had another excuse for Kathy.
Eric told me that his name was Eric Stone because it was just too dangerous for me to know the truth.
Kathy returned home to Colorado with far more questions than answers.
I never really quite felt about him the way I did in the beginning. But again, I'm stuck, I'm married, I made vows.
Kathy wanted to believe him. And the fact is he had spun such a story in the beginning that he was able to kind of tie some facts together.
Kathy decided to accept Eric's story and pressed no further. But over the next 8 years, their relationship suffered ups and downs of a different kind, as Eric turned cold and detached.
Eric was not caring, not coming home, not being supportive in any way in my life.
And that was just the beginning. Eric's behavior was about to take a sinister turn that would leave Kathy fearing for her own life.
And he was on top of me and he said, "Don't F with me. I am a killer. I will kill you."
In the fall of 1992, Kathy Spires was determined to get her rocky marriage to Eric back on track. She had an idea for a Christmas gift that she hoped would bring them closer together.
I started thinking about extra high school and that all of his family's gone, and I thought it'd be just nice, since he had a fire in his house, to get him a high school yearbook so he'll have those memories.
Kathy called the school, and in a fortuitous twist, the man on the other end turned out to be her husband's old buddy, Chuck Knox.
Eric was very well liked, kind of a fair-haired golden boy at Exeter High School. He was a very intelligent, articulate, and was definitely Casanova.
But that wasn't all Chuck knew. And when Kathy dug for more details, she got the shock of her life.
Chuck says, he had a sister. I said, no, he didn't have any sisters or brothers. He said, well, I went to school with his sister. I said, well, but you know his mom died. His mom died when he was in high school. He said, no. I'm going, what?
Kathy couldn't believe it, and I could tell the wheels were spinning in her head.
Oh my God. I'm trying to be cool because what if, I'm imagining in my head how this could be.
Pressed by Kathy, Chuck went on to reveal one disturbing detail after another.
One of the gals he'd gone out with apparently died at a young age. It was suspected suicide. The speculation that she went off the deep end after Eric broke up with her.
I hung up the phone and I felt sick. I didn't know what I was going to do.
But confronting a potentially dangerous pathological liar is a risky proposition.
And I'm like, oh crap, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? So I acted like nothing happened.
Kathy desperately tried to ignore the truth about her husband, but Eric was rapidly becoming her worst nightmare. And when she turned to a therapist for help, Eric went off the deep end.
He started a fight, and he threw me into a wall, and he was on top of me, and he said, "Don't F with me. I am a killer. I will kill you if you don't leave my past alone." I'm a killer! That's when I met Eric Wright.
He hurt her. He physically hurt her. Kathy's a little bitty thing. She did not know who he was.
After 12 years together, Kathy now knew she could no longer stay with such a dangerous man.
I wanted to get her over with, to move on. I gave him far too much of my time.
But on February 13th, 1993, Eric beat Kathy to it and served her with divorce papers. When Eric moved out, Kathy concocted a plan.
I'm sitting there just thinking about all of the stuff. I'm going, I gotta find some answers. And I started making phone calls.
No longer fearing her husband's wrath, Kathy embarked on a desperate search to uncover everything about Eric's secret past. She began by placing another call to Chuck Knox.
Kathy was very upset at what he had done to her. This became her life goal, is to find out the secret.
I found out not only was he married before, but that he had been married to 2 other women, and he'd had 2 children.
So this blew her away, and she was not going to let him get away with it.
Chuck put Kathy in touch with Eric's former wife, who had a devastating story to tell.
On their little girl's birthday, Eric was supposed to go to the store, pick up supplies. He went to the store, but never came back.
Eric Wright had attempted to pull off the impossible.
Eric staged his disappearance, but the Department of Justice interviewed a bunch of people and found out that he was a voluntary missing person.
When he went missing, he had a Honda, and he shot a bullet hole in that Honda, and of all things, he put animal blood on it. What the heck?
Since Eric was officially declared a missing person and was never divorced from his last wife, the validity of his marriage to Kathy stood in question.
He was married when he married me. He was a bigamist. Scumbag bigamist.
So once the lies started being exposed, she was just ruthless.
Kathy would soon find out exactly what her husband had been hiding from.
He was a murderer, and just for money.
And she's about to get the ultimate revenge.
I think if Kathy would have never come forward, the case would have never been solved.
Don't mess with me!
By the spring of 1993, Kathy Spires was well on her way to uncovering the truth about her ex-husband Eric's secret past. And she had just formed a new ally, San Joaquin County Assistant Sheriff John Huber.
I told Detective Huber I'd been married to a man, and when I met him, he has all these gold bars, a lot of gold bars. And that's what struck Huber.
We had a case. The body was found in 1980 in the California aqueduct, and the body was clothed, no shoes, and it had the chain tied with cable ties around the hands and feet. And in the investigation, he's missing gold bars, and it's an unsolved case.
The corpse was that of Lester Marks, a petty thief who would melt jewelry into gold bars. After hearing Kathy's story, Assistant Sheriff Huber reopened the case to see if they could link Eric Wright to Lester's murder.
The Department of Justice had done an investigation when Eric staged his disappearance over in the Bay Area, and I pulled out the actual old file with some of the evidence that they'd collected.
In 1980, when Eric had staged his disappearance, he was working as a precious metals dealer, and police had found some very strange items at his office.
In his desk drawer, it had a number of cable ties, one that was very, very close in size to the cable ties that Lester Marks was bound with.
But even more telling was what was found during the original murder investigation, an item that at the time was overlooked.
The police found right next to the bed of Lester Marks' house a notepad written Eric Wright and a phone number.
Sometimes it's right under your nose.
Things were beginning to add up, and in November of 1993, Assistant Sheriff Huber flew to Denver to interrogate Eric Wright.
He denied he never knew Lester Marks, never heard of Lester Marks, and didn't know what I was talking about.
But Huber wasn't buying it, and Eric Wright was summoned for questioning in the death of Lester Marks.
They sent him an invitation to go to a grand jury, and you can either show up or run. He ran straight to Mexico.
While Eric was enjoying the sun and sand, investigators carefully built their case against him.
Eric was in Mexico 4 or 5 years, living on the beach, until the FBI got an arrest warrant to have him extradited back to the United States.
Finally, on April 29, 2002, after nearly 23 years on the run, Eric Wright was arrested in the death of Lester Marks. To avoid a murder trial, he pled guilty to involuntary manslaughter.
I think if Kathy would have never come forward, the case would have never been solved.
I was so happy. It was a nice present.
But Kathy's elation would be short-lived. Eric Wright was released from prison in 2007 after serving only 4.5 years.
She has lived this for 30 years, and it has consumed her. He haunts her.
Today, Kathy lives a quiet life in Arizona and will never forget her biggest mistake, marrying the wrong man.
At this point, I don't think Kathy will marry again unless she leaves this behind her. And I don't know if Kathy has let it go yet.
The lesson that I learned is, if you have low self-esteem, this is no time to be looking for Mr. Correct, because you're vulnerable to anybody out there that's preying on someone to hide behind.
And today, Kathy has a very different take on dating a man of mystery.
I would never date a man that came to me and said, I have a mysterious past. And that's when it's a good thing to be quiet, and you just agree, and you back up slowly.
Absolutely.